Ben Motorcycle Adventures podcast, your hub for everything off-road, dual sport, and adventure motorcycle. My name is John. I will be your host. This is episode number 24, Ben Motorcycle Adventures podcast. Thank you for joining, and as always, thank you for listening. Really excited about tonight's guest. We've got a returning guest. Keith from episode 7, The Motorcycle Adventure, is back. He was just riding on the Baja Peninsula for a number of days. Nice long trip. He escaped the cold weather from the East Coast, spent some time at Baja. So he's here to detail that trip. We'll also talk a little bit about riding in Alaska, the Continental Divide. Keith is just a wealth or a fountain of knowledge. So plethora of topics coming your way here on episode number 24. Little note here for Android users. I've noticed that Google Play Music, at least on my desktop browser here in Safari, I need to check in Chrome, but it doesn't seem to be picking up the latest episode of the podcast. So if you're an Android user, you might try the app TuneIn or the app Stitcher to listen to the podcast. I'll see if I can figure out this situation here with Google Play Music, but it doesn't seem to be picking up my last few podcasts. As always, iTunes and YouTube are also great resources to listen to the show. Managed to pick up a Hero 7 Black, a GoPro, this past week. And just a heads up for you guys, they're on sale right now. $349 for the Black. And if you have a previous generation GoPro, you can actually trade that in and get a little bit of equity, if you will. I opted to keep my Hero 6 Black, but I know this camera's been out for a while. The reason I didn't buy it earlier was because I had already purchased the 6 not long before the launch of the 7, go figure. But I've had a lot of problems with my 6 in relation to wind noise. Just some really atrocious wind noise when riding the bike. Not even as good in the sound department as any of the previous generation GoPros. And I'm told the 7's a lot better. I've also bought some video mics and things like that to improve the sound if needed. But I want to get out there and try this Hero 7 as soon as we get some better weather and just see how it stacks up against the 6. And I think you guys should keep a lookout, probably on the YouTube channel and on our blog, benmotorcycleadventures.com, for some comparisons here in the very near future. But just a heads up, just a reminder, if you're in the market for a new GoPro, again, the Hero 7 Black is on sale, $349. At least that's what I saw and that's what I paid. You might find one even cheaper. Something else I wanted to point out, if you are a KTM 790 Adventure or Adventure R fan, or you're gonna get one of those models this year like myself, or you're just interested in information about the bike, I've started a Facebook group. It's called KTM 790 Adventure R. The group is closed. Basically, you just have to answer a quick question to join the group, and it should be clean, sophisticated fun, and a lot of relevant information about the bike. You know, going forward, as soon as I take delivery of mine, I'll do a lot of walkthroughs and add-ons and whatever. You can follow my build there along the way, but it's really meant to be a nice place to kind of condense a lot of information about the KTM 790 Adventure R. So if you're interested in that Facebook group, one more time, KTM 790 Adventure R. Last thing, question of the week. Our friend Keith was able to escape the bad East Coast weather and really enjoy himself on the Baja Peninsula. But for those of you and those of us who don't have that luxury or don't live in the Southwest or the Southeast, what do you do this time of year? How do you pass the time? Is it bike maintenance? Do you watch videos? Do you punish yourself like that and wish you were somewhere else? Or do you just kind of abandon motorcycles until you get decent riding weather? I'd be interested to know. benmotorcycleadventures@gmail.com. Shoot me an email. I'll read that stuff back on the next episode. All right, that's about enough from me. Let's jump into the podcast. Let's talk to Keith about his Baja adventure. Ben Motorcycle Adventures, episode 24. Thank you for listening.
Well, we've got cold, but we've got rain. We're a few degrees above freezing, so I guess we lucked out.
You're hanging in there.
Hard to complain. Spring will be here soon.
I know. So that's a significant contrast from your motorcycle adventure in Baja, right?
Indeed. Yeah, so, 75 to 80 and sunny it's hard to beat.
That sounds horrible. What is it about Baja? What's with all the mystique? There's a lot of people down there that I personally know right now. What it is about Baja in this time of year?
So part of it is the weather is terrific. It's hard to find better weather anywhere in the United States. Part of it is it's a vast landscape that has a tremendous diversity. I don't know how much background or context you want, but you've probably traveled to California.
Oh, sure.
So imagine you started at the Oregon line and you were discovering California and you traveled the length of the state. You'd encounter a tremendous diversity. And imagine you did that where the weather was just really excellent, 60 at night, 80 during the day. And rather than being as wide as California was, the width of California varied from 25 to 150 miles. So California, I think, is about 200 miles wide. Maybe it's 150, but it's the length of California, not quite as wide, and it only has 10% of the population. And imagine California had an ocean on two sides.
Sure, so you're riding on the peninsula.
Right. And so you've got mountains, you've got desert, you've got canyons, you've got ocean, and you've got remoteness. And the people you encounter in these remote places are just awesome, wonderful people, thrilled to see you because they just don't get that many visitors.
Yeah, that continues to be a theme. Everyone I've spoken to who has ridden through Mexico or South America kind of welcome with open arms for the most part. That's good to hear.
And I think Baja is special. Even the Mexicans consider Baja to be sort of a tourist-free zone because it's so remote and there's so little business and so little agriculture there. Even the Mexicans consider it to be like a special part of Mexico. No, it's really an unusual place. Have you ever been to Italy?
No, I have not. That is definitely on the agenda for me here in a couple of years.
So many Americans fall in love with Italy, and they love the diversity, the Adriatic on the east, the Mediterranean on the west, the way the shorelines just plummet down to the sea, the fact that everything is terraced and civilized, and the food is wonderful. Baja is kind of like Italy before it became populated. Italy is similar in length to Baja and maybe a little wider. But if you'd like to see Italy 3,000 years ago, go to Baja.
That's an interesting take. When I think about Italy, I think about myself on the Mediterranean, visiting, the Roman Colosseum and places like that.
Yeah, so if we populated Baja and waited 3,000 years... Anyway, it's to answer your question, I think part of the magic is the incredible diversity and the fact that it's a wild, uninhabited place, and the people you do meet are incredibly friendly and helpful and just delighted to see you. And that if you listen to people's stories and examples, whether it's adversity or just stopping for lunch, people are just awfully good-natured, and it's a friendship almost. It's a good nature that's hard to find here in the U.S. People here are civil, but in Mexico, people are downright friendly. I think I told you after my trip to Mexico City in February, I came back and one of my colleagues said, "Could you describe your adventure in Mexico? I heard it's really scary and awful." And I said, it's hard to describe, but I think Mexico was the richest poor country I've ever visited. And they said, "What do you mean?" And I said, the people are incredibly rich, the families, the communities. People go out and walk the town square. They know their neighbors. They help visitors. And yet they have no or very poor material goods, very few flat screens, new cars, big houses. They're just materially very poor. But for all of the things that you and I would consider to be important, they're incredibly rich, much richer than we are.
Yeah, it's an interesting, deep take.
Yeah, and that comes across. And when you're riding a motorcycle, you know how we're more open to interaction with the people around us. And we feel that, we sense that, and we experience that. So when people say, oh, gosh, I went to Baja and I can't wait to go back, and you listen to their stories, and the stories are, for the most part, adversity compounded by delightful help.
Interesting. And you touched on something there that's really important to me, which is diversity. When I go on rides and I try to promote this locally, I want to see something different every day, and that's why I love Oregon. We've got the coast, we've got the Cascade Range, we've got the volcanic landscapes, we've got the deserts. Is Baja like that with that much diversity?
Yeah. Oregon's probably a great example. Imagine you took Oregon and squeezed it in terms of the width, and you stretched it out in terms of length, north to south. And then you added another ocean on the eastern shore of Oregon. There are all of the things you described in Baja. And the other thing that's interesting in Baja is because it's a fairly dry climate, you have this incredible sort of desert diversity. You come across deserts that have a tremendous amount of cactus plants, diversity in cactus plants. And then you get into another desert, and it's a very different population of cactus plants. And some of them look like a Dr. Seuss book, and some of them look like a Jurassic Park book, because they're out to eat you like the dinos are, and the other ones are there to cuddle you. And it's the diversity, and it's the biological diversity that really smacks you on the side of the head. You appreciate. I mean, I'm sure you do in Oregon. Just what a wonderful experience you have when you go from the ocean to the mountains and back. And in Baja, you can do that. You can start out on one coast in the morning, ride to the other coast, and ride back to the other coast in a day's ride. Probably 3 of our 10-day rides did just that.
Oh, wow. So I've noticed, or I think we've all noticed that, Southern California is getting quite a bit of rain this winter, and that hasn't really been the norm over the past few years. Pretty significant drought down there. Were you guys, the benefactors of that while you were in Baja?
Indeed. One of the things that's really remarkable about Baja this year is the deserts are just green, and there are flowers in bloom, and it's been a really unusual year. Last October, a hurricane blew through central Baja, and it dumped an enormous amount of water, washed out a bunch of roads too. But it really deposited a lot of water, and so these cactus plants that hadn't been watered in years have all flourished. And then this wet winter that California has experienced has also dumped a fair amount of water in Baja, and things are just really enjoying that moisture.
So considering that, would you say that winter is the best time to ride Baja, or because it's coastal, can you enjoy yourself year-round down there? What do you think?
So I've asked people about that because my experience is limited to 3 trips, 2 in December and 1 in January. And I asked colleagues who've ridden quite a bit, and I said, gee, can I come back here in the summer and enjoy this? And they said, well, if you stay on the Pacific, you can enjoy it. But on the Sea of Cortez or the Bay of California, it's really too hot in the summer. And I think part of the magic of Baja is, in Maryland or probably in Oregon this time of year, it's really hard to go riding for a week with a light T-shirt and your jacket.
Yes. Oh, geez.
And to just load up your bike and not worry about carrying a down jacket and electric gear is like, wow, And your major concern there is, do you have enough water, because it's going to be hot. So I would argue that probably the 6 months focused on October, November, December, January, February, March are ideal for riders. But you could go year-round. You'd probably want to stay on the Pacific coast or near the Pacific coast because of those cooling ocean breezes. But it does get pretty hot there. I mean, it gets hot in Southern California, too.
Sure. Yeah,
a lot of people won't. Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of my favorite things to do is visit Hawaii, around December or January when the whales are in there. But it's nice being an Oregonian to get that kind of change of pace. I remember when I went a couple of years ago, it was, we had record snowfall. It was 10, 15 degrees for about a month. And then I showed up in Kona and it was 75, 80 every day. So it's nice to transition out of this ice age and get somewhere warm.
So did you get to spend time in the water with the whales?
No, saw him from afar. It really wasn't that. It really wasn't that kind of moment. We're going to go back here in February 2020. A little bit later, probably late February, mid-February, and try to see some up close and personal. I did go out and do some fishing, and of course, I love to golf, so I spent plenty of time on the course. But it's a great time of year to be in Hawaii too.
Yeah, well, if you like whales, the whole Baja Peninsula is just full of whales. It's a breeding ground for many different kinds of whales. And on this trip was a little different than my previous trips. Previous trips, we'd ridden round trip. We left San Diego, we rode to Cabo, and we rode back to San Diego in 10 days. And that was a long trip. This trip, we took 10 days, and we rode down to Cabo, and then we put our bikes on an 18-wheeler. And they trailered the bikes back to Tijuana over 2 days, and we spent 2 days in La Paz, and we went swimming with the whales, and that was magnificent. They have these whale sharks or shark whales, I don't know what they're called, these big whales, and you take a mask and snorkel, and you go out in the harbor in La Paz on these little panga boats, and the guide finds the whales. And then you hop in the water, and you're limited the number of people that can swim along the whale. They limit it to 3 people. And then you swim along the whale for 5 or 10 minutes until you get tired. And then you hop back in the boat, and the other folks hop in. But these swimming next to a 40 or 50-foot whale who's just lumbering along, and you're paddling just to keep up, and you see their eyes and you just swim along the length of them, and you see these tiny little fish that are cleaning them stuck on their tails and their fins. And if you enjoy whales, if you enjoy fishing, I'd strongly encourage you to fly to San Diego, walk across the border, and fly from Tijuana to La Paz. They have cheap flights every day, $80, and you'll fish until you're tired of fishing, and you'll swim with the whales, and the water is magnificent. And the cost, it cost us $50 for a half day's adventure of swimming with the whales. And the hotels are cheap, and the food is awesome, and the people are terrific. The other advantage of going to Baja for you is, for the most part, you'll be in the same time zone or only off by 1 hour. I don't know what it is to Hawaii, but it's probably
3 hours.
Oh, that's not so bad. Yeah.
There was a guy. Go ahead. It's great when you show up. It's horrible when you leave and you come back and you lose your 3 hours. You're like, no.
Yeah. Well, there was a guy on this trip who was from Hawaii. I'd ridden the previous ride with him. I think it was a Continental Divide. And he's a fairly successful contractor on the Big Island. And on his bucket list was to ride Baja. And so he flew in from Hawaii, flew into San Diego, had his motorbike there. He had a Husky 501, and he rode Baja, and he just couldn't believe. Now, he lives in Hawaii, and he's used to good weather, but he just marveled at how each day was so nobody there, and just the waves and the fog and the birds, and then the fog lifts and the sun comes out, and you're riding with your buddies, and the only concern you have in the world is what time's lunch.
Yeah. Speaking of lunch, I've scrolled through all your photos here on your On Any Sunday, your Google Photos. You guys make me hungry. You definitely were not. You weren't hurting for meals. Let's say that. Holy smokes.
Yeah. To be honest with you, John, I don't know why we focus so much on photographing meals. Part of it is it's a way for us to express the absolute delight we have in our newfound friends. There are 24 guys on this ride, and we ride in groups of 2, 3, or 4. And so that day you spend with those 4 or 5 guys, 3 or 4 guys. And when you have a lunch and you get together with other groups, it's kind of like, oh, how was your day? What'd you discover? And the food is terrific. And yet there's just an awful lot of positive energy because of everybody having a good time. And so I think that's the reason that the food photos come across. It's to be, yeah.
It seems to be, I don't want to say human nature. I think we go back to nomadic times. I'm not sure if they were all
could be
sitting around a rock, but there's something to be said for that kind of gathering. For people, it seems to touch a nerve that's kind of near and dear to all of us too.
Yeah, there's something. I think you're probably right. There's the idea of breaking bread together, especially with people you're not so familiar with. and that's a real positive experience.
Yeah, and back to your travel pitch there, my girlfriend will probably listen to this podcast and let her know, hey, maybe it's not Hawaii next February for her birthday. Maybe it is La Paz.
Well, I don't know how hard it is for you to get time off. We started our trip on a Friday afternoon, and we finished on a Sunday afternoon. So what's that, 10 days? Friday, Saturday, Sunday plus 7. Yeah, that's 10 days. And what we experienced in that 10 days was just magical. It was easy. It was without stress. It didn't really matter if we did everything on the list that day. By noontime, we'd done enough to be happy for the next 3 days. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and we've spoken to a couple of people who are riding around the world recently, and something that I wanted to know was, hey, what's your day-to-day plan? Do you know where you're going to be the following day? What's the destination in mind? And most of them are kind of doing it ad lib. They're as they go. That's so foreign to me. I plan everything out, but that's an interesting take when you have time to just kind of ride to where you're comfortable and call it good.
Well, what's fun about the Baja trips that I've been on is each day we travel to a different town and hotel, but we also have the option on each day to take a bailout route. So if you really get stuck on the first third of the ride and you really enjoy it, come lunchtime, you can just take pavement into the hotel and you'll be there before dark. So even though you know where you're going to be, you don't worry about getting there. Do you know what I mean? Sure.
And it, like you said, you have the bailout. It looks like Kevin has put just a tremendous amount of work into his maps and routes. That's crazy that you have so many options.
Well, when you're riding with different people, it's really an advantage. And even you would like to have a day of rest or a really aggressive day, where you really want to go do all the reds. And then the next day, maybe you just want to take a nice slow blue along the beach.
Yeah, in backpacking, we call them 0 days, where we don't do too much. We don't cover 20, 25 miles.
Well, there's as a male, there's a real motivation to do all of the great stuff and squeeze it all in. And after a couple of days, you say, why didn't he schedule a rest day or a 0 day as you backpackers? Why did he wait until the end of the trip? Because I could really use one. But I'm not going to admit it, And so you're up at 5 o'clock and getting your bike ready. And as soon as the sun rises, you're off for another 220-mile day of single track or slow stuff that's just awesome,
Yeah, it's weird how that sense of adventure can create some urgency. Every time I go ride, especially somewhere new, I always want to see what's around the next corner. I'm afraid I'm going to miss something, and then before you know it, I've burnt through my route, at least for the day, by noon.
Yeah, well, if I could change the Baja trip, I would definitely add a week to it. I'd make it 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
There's so much to see and there's so much to do, but for a lot of people, getting 2 weeks off is it's really hard. And so getting 10 days is kind of a reasonable compromise.
So
this last trip, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to dive in there, but maybe this is something for later. But yeah, you mentioned there's so much to see and do. I was going to ask you, what are some of the notable stops or landmarks along the way? I've watched a lot of stuff on Baja and seen some. I don't know how I would describe them. Ancient churches and things like that. What's down there for everyone to see?
So, by analogy is probably reasonable. Imagine you started at the Oregon-California border and you had to ride the length of California over 10 days and you had to describe what you saw.
Okay. Too broad. Too broad.
Well, no, I mean, everywhere you turn, there's really amazing stuff, right? Sure. There's the Northern California coastline, which is so special. And then you get into the mountains, and rather than the big sequoias, they have these huge saguaro cactus that must be 30, 40 feet high. And these cactus are like towering, And then you travel down into a canyon and the mountains come up. And, the mountains aren't 14,000 feet. I don't know what the highest mountain is in Baja, maybe 5,000, 6,000 feet. But to go from the ocean to elevation, in December we went up into elevation, and you asked about rain earlier. As we went up into elevation, one of the higher points in northern Baja, it started to snow. And that was in December.
I was going to ask you about that. A couple of your pictures, it looks like it. I wasn't sure if it was just white sand or snow.
Well, there's an awful lot of beautiful sand in Baja. There's sand everywhere in Baja, particularly along the coast. But so I'm not trying to dodge your question, but there are many wonderful villages along the coast, both coasts. There are small little villages in the middle of the country that are there probably because a Spanish or Benedictine or whatever it was mission was there in the 1700s, and that probably means there was a water source. There are oases, kind of like you'd find in the Middle East. Imagine you're going through the Sinai Desert and you come across this huge oasis, and there are all these date palm trees and some hand-dug aqueducts that provide water to the whole valley. And you can see that this has been a farming village for a couple of hundred years. But for the most part, it's largely uninhabited. And there are large areas that you'd call protected, not protected by U.S. government standards that exclude motorcycles, but protected from development. So most of the roads in Baja are dirt or gravel. A lot of them are what you'd call primitive dirt and gravel. Some of them haven't had a blade over them in a couple of years, and because of the weather, they can get pretty awful. Even roads that should be good can be pretty awful. And for somebody who likes to ride off-road, those are great roads.
How did the trusty WR do down there?
So, funny you should ask. 24 motorbikes, 3 WRs, 21 KTMs.
I like that ratio.
There was a guy, Mike Black. I had never met this guy. He's from the San Francisco Bay Area. And he was a quiet, unassuming guy that arrived with a Home Depot orange toolbox that said KTM Tools Plus Parts.
Okay.
So the WRs were great. No mechanical issues, no flat tires. Put in gas and go. The first day, just as we were leaving San Diego, one of the KTMs had a dead battery, and it was one of those new lithium-ion batteries. And Mike says, I got a spare battery in my toolbox. So he whips out this, and the KTM 500 has a small battery spec, and he had one that fit right in there under the seat, Mm-hmm. And so in less than 10 minutes, we're no longer delayed. And day 2, we're riding along, and a guy's front sprocket falls off. And we're in fairly rural. And on the KTM 500, there's a special bolt that holds the front sprocket on, and it's the only bolt of its kind on the KTM. And it has a very special washer that puts pressure on that sprocket that prevents the oil seal from leaking. And it was just in the morning as he was pulling out to go, and the sprocket fell off. And I zoomed back 4 miles to the hotel we were staying at. Mike was there, and I said, hey, Mike, you wouldn't happen to have a sprocket bolt in your box? Oh, yeah, here it is.
Yeah, that's. I think that's called is it a Bellevue or something like? It's got a taper on it, so it compresses. It's a special,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
And then day 5, a guy's rear wheel bearings froze. And Mike had spare rear wheel bearings.
I need to go riding with Mike.
Don't you think?
Wow.
In fact, John, what I'm going to do is Mike sent this list of all of the parts he carried and all of the tools he had in that box. And he basically saved 4 people's rides.
Oh, that's cool.
Isn't it? And he's just a generous guy. And he also had spare tubes because a couple of guys, flats are expected, right?
Sure.
we all carry spare tubes, but one of the guys had gone through a couple tubes, and Mike had extra tubes to provide to that guy who needed a couple extra 21s, super heavy duty, the 4 mil ones. And I'm thinking, Mike Black's on my list of the first guy to invite on my KTM rides.
Every ride, yeah. Come on, Mike, and bring your toolbox, would you?
Anyway, he's this wonderful guy. But to answer your question, the WRs probably didn't have a statistically significant number. Probably if we had 21 WRs, we would have found 4 failures too. I doubt it, but
sure. Sounds like you had a good time. How many miles did you end up logging ultimately?
It depends on what route you took. Most of us did 12 to 1,400 miles.
Okay.
In 10 days.
Run. That's a good run.
Yeah. In contrast to what we did in December, which was 23 to 2,400 miles.
Okay.
The previous 2 Decembers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested in the WR. My girlfriend's going to get a motorcycle this year, so she can start riding dual sport at least. WR would be a great option. I just think it's too tall I know it's too tall without lowering it for her. She's only 5 foot tall. I'd like to get a WR, but...
So, the WR... so you're a strong supporter of new people to the sport and women. And I think the WR represents a really good entry point for those people. There's a woman I know who lives in southern Maryland who's probably 5 feet tall. And she has done a fabulous website on all the different ways you can lower a WR for people who aren't so tall.
Okay.
I don't know. Do you go to ADV Rider much?
Yeah, quite a bit.
I think her handle on ADV Rider is Dorito, like the Dorito corn chips.
Oh, that sounds good.
and she's an engineer who's very thoughtful in her description of lowering the WR. She also lowered a BMW X Country, the 650 that's lightweight for her, and she wrote a really nice write-up on that. So your girlfriend would probably do really well on a lowered WR. My KTMs are both lowered 2 inches, and even though I'm 6 feet tall, I find that useful. So, I think, sure, the WR is tall, but your girlfriend would probably do better on a WR than a KTM.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the KTMs are up there, too. I just know that the WR is a nice, reliable platform, good motor. I think it'd be a great starting point if we could get her to where she could touch on it for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think I mentioned to you, when I do rides where I'm the ride yoder, the ride leader, on my support vehicle, I carry a spare WR simply because it's this bulletproof bike. And if somebody's bike breaks and it's not repairable, I say, hey, take the WR. I can't say anything bad about it. My only complaint is I wish it were 50 pounds lighter.
Sure.
But if you're in the Bend motorcycle rental business, my guess, here's a prediction for you. In 5 years, rather than a fleet of KTMs, you'll have a fleet of WRs.
Okay, I'm going to write that down, Keith. Definitely be more cost effective, not going to lie.
Well, and to be honest with you, John, I don't think the fun factor is much different. If you don't have to worry that your bike's going to do this or that or that or this, and you can really abuse it, and all you have to do is see if there's air in the tires and check the oil when you get home. I mean, you know how much service the KTMs take. And don't get me wrong, I have 3 of them. I think it's the most awesome motorcycle made. And if you're lucky enough to own one and ride one, you've gone to heaven. But if you're going to run a business where people have to use and not necessarily maintain, but might abuse, I think the WR is 98% of a KTM, in part because of that reliability factor.
Sure, I would
also
argue.
for your girlfriend, is she very experienced?
She's ridden off road quite a bit already.
Okay.
So, but now she wants to get out and do the plated stuff.
Okay. Well, yeah. I would strongly encourage you to get one. You can probably buy one used that's been lowered 2 inches if you just look around.
Sure, that's very possible. But that's kind of what we're looking at. WR, the KTM 250 Dual Sport, and then the Yamaha XT 252. I think those are kind of the three options.
Yeah, well, you probably can't go wrong with any one of those. They're all great choices.
Sure. You probably don't know this. I'm going to add another KTM to my arsenal, believe it or not.
Which one? The 790?
The 790. We're going to get that. So
well, good for you. Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to, I don't know. It's my first larger adventure bike, if you will. We'll see how it goes. I guess if I don't enjoy myself on it, I'll get rid of it.
It's hard to imagine you won't enjoy it. My guess is what you'll discover is it does some things really, really well, better than any other bike you have. And some things it feels like just a little heavier, and you'd like it, to be a little lighter, like your 500. But the other things compensate for that. And it's like having a toolbox, right?
Yeah, and it's not a bike I'm going to take on trails or single track. Specifically ADV type riding. Talked to some guests recently. I'd really like to go and take it up onto the Dalton, ride through Alaska, Continental Divide. I think those are good places for that bike. So,
well, and probably a lot of the backcountry discovery routes would be great.
Oh yeah. Speaking of, go ahead.
Go ahead. Would it be as much fun as a KTM 500 on some of those off BDR routes that you'd like to ride? No, but that's not what the BDR is.
Yeah. Speaking of, I was thinking of Alaska. Have you ridden at all up in Alaska?
No, it's on my wish list. Part of the challenge for me is I live in Maryland, and what I've concluded is I should probably ship my bike to either Seattle or Anchorage, ride, because a large part of what I'd like to ride that falls into the Alaska bucket is actually Canada and the Northwest Territory. And by the time you spend 4 weeks here and 2 weeks there, you just don't have time to either ride there or ride home. So I'm still working full time, and I think it's a minimum 4 weeks, even if you start out in Anchorage. So it's on my wish list, but yeah, I have the books, I have the maps, I've got the desire.
Mine too, and that's one of those where I don't want to rush it. I just want to kind of work my way through Alaska and kind of come and go as I please and take my time and see everything and try to get everything there in one swoop.
Yeah, well, it could be that your experience is like it's been in Oregon. You can't get enough of it.
That could be it, yeah.
You just want to go back and back and back.
Yeah, we're gonna have to check that out. I've watched a fair amount of video on the motorcycle touring company in Iceland too. I think that would be amazing to go check that out.
This year, apparently in the Northwest Territory, they've opened up a highway. You know how in Alaska there's a road that goes up to Prudhoe Bay? I think it's Dead Horse.
Yeah.
Well, in the Northwest Territory, they've opened up. The road used to go from Dawson City, I think, up to Fort McPherson, and it would end at a town called Univik. And this year, they've opened up the road all the way to the Arctic Circle, to a town that a lot of people are excited about, and they plan to travel to this summer. I can't quite pronounce it, but it's something like Tuktoyaktuk. It's got about 6 syllables, and it starts with a tuk, and it ends with a tuk.
It's an Eskimo name or something?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that would be interesting too.
Yeah, that's kind of a new destination, and it's one of those long roads up and long roads back, kind of like the Dalton.
Yeah, but, it's amazing what man can do. I watched a video of that Dalton, looking at the pipeline, and just the totality of that road just blows my mind.
Well, and you hear stories about people having a wonderful ride and people having a miserable ride, and you realize it's just the luck of the draw,
No, I think timing's everything. I could see where that road would be pretty miserable in the ice and snow, obviously, but it looks like with all the truck traffic, it wouldn't take much to make it really muddy, too.
So what would you take? Would you take your new 790 on that?
I think so. Just looking at the road and considering comfort factor, I think the 790 would be great up there. but I wouldn't want to get, I don't know, I don't want to get it that dirty right away either. So the 500 is a pretty versatile tool. I mean, you can't really go wrong there.
So one of the problems of riding in Baja is there's salt everywhere.
Oh.
And if you ride along the ocean for 30 or 40 miles, at the end of the day, you really need to hose off your bike because there's just a lot of salt. And probably in Alaska, we could find people with power washers and car washes, where we could do that. That's one of the things we did in Baja is after we rode on the beach. All of the gas stations there, not only did they have the air for your tires, but next to it they had these free water hoses so you could wash off the salt or the sand. And that was really nice.
Yeah, it's funny.
I'm not sure we got it all off, but we felt better about it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. That was the first thing that the two travelers did when they got off the Dalton, because whatever they put in the road there is very corrosive on the motorcycles.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason the rental companies aren't very enthusiastic and they charge you a surcharge if you're going to ride the Dalton on a rental, because it really is hard on the bikes.
Yeah, and maybe that's the way to go too. Just rent a bike and ride around up there too.
Bike rentals are expensive, but there is a benefit.
Yeah, for sure. Fly in, fly out, and
right.
Not a ton of liability. There's some liability, but not a ton. I've been kicking around the Continental Divide a lot. I don't think we're going to go this year because I'm going to go to the KTM rally in September, and that's going to eat up a bunch of my time. But what else can you personally tell me about the Continental Divide that firsthand experience? You've obviously been on it.
So, I think it's a great ride. In many ways, I think it's better than the TAT because you can do it in 12 days. People will discuss whether you should do it south to north, north to south. We did it south to north, and that's the biggest window of availability simply because of the weather. You can start in the south, and the problem in the Continental Divide, or the challenge in the Continental Divide, is getting through the passes that are fairly high, and the snow lingers until June or July. And starting on the Continental Divide late in June or July, it's really hot in southern Colorado and New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And so that's what you're trying to balance. I think, if you have 2 weeks for a ride, the Continental Divide is probably one of the sweetest rides you can do. It's got a little bit of everything in it. It's not technically very difficult. The days can be long. There's a fair amount to see. And to say that you've ridden your motorbike down the spine of the Continental Divide from Mexico to Canada is a real sense of accomplishment. That's quite an adventure. The logistical challenge is either getting home from the end or getting to the start, and and that you just have to figure out. I'm happy to offer you suggestions for that. The way I did it is I found a guy who was going to the start. I happened to be in Salt Lake at a BMW rally, and I was giving a couple of talks there, and I found an airline that flies to Silver City, New Mexico, which was like 2 miles from where the Continental Divide started. It's where our Continental Divide started. It was probably 30 miles north. But there was an airport there, and they flew in little planes, and so a guy had brought my bike, and I flew in, and at the end, I just rode my bike from the Canadian border back to Salt Lake, which was a day, and that wasn't so bad. I don't know what it is from Eureka, Montana, where you end, back to Bend, Oregon, but it's probably a day. Yeah,
it's probably about 16, 18 hours maybe.
Is it that far? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just kind of comparing and contrasting with, I know where the KTM rally is this year in Breckenridge is about 17 hours. Might be a little bit closer.
Is it that far?
Yeah. So it might be a little bit closer from Montana, but...
Yeah, so I think if you could put that on your schedule, you'd thoroughly enjoy it. You wouldn't be physically exhausted. And what most people do is they put in a rest day where they get to ride around Yellowstone.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of like really icing on the cake. There's a lot to see. There's a lot to discover. There are some really remote areas that you get to ride. And there are options. There's some technical stuff that you could schedule in, and there's some paved road stuff you could schedule in. And depending on how you feel that day, or what you're riding, you could have a really enjoyable trip. I think what's great about that trip is if you rode it with some friends that you really wanted to share the experience with. Your girlfriend would be ideal.
Yeah, she's talking about it already.
I mean, there's just one of the hard things I had riding through South America is I was riding with a good buddy, but my wife wasn't there. Somebody I really shared a lot of things in life with. And, you see this spectacular view or you have this wonderful experience. And there's something that makes it even more rich when you share it with somebody you care about.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the towns that we stopped in for motels, we stayed in motels in that whole trip. And it would probably be even richer if you camped half the time, because some of the camping sites along that route are just terrific. Just some wonderful national parks and state forests. But many of the towns we stayed in were totally delightful. I remember one evening we were in Helena, Montana. It was great. The people were terrific. The pubs, the coffee shops. There happened to be a motorcycle show there, a bunch of off-track stuff, and we were right in the middle of it. We didn't even know it was there. Some of the other small towns, southern Idaho, northern Wyoming, rural Colorado, just really fun kind of places you'd love to go spend a weekend or a week, but you only have a night. So
yes,
I'd encourage you
that stinking schedule.
Well, I would encourage you to don't delay. If you could squeeze it into your schedule, you could do it in 10 days. 12 days is better. If you put a day on each end and maybe you ship your bike to home from the end or ship it to the beginning to save you a day or here or there, it's probably worth the $500. And
sure,
I'd be happy to talk to you in more detail. But you shouldn't delay it. It's a wonderful ride. It's a really fun ride. You get to ride the length of New Mexico, south to north. Then you follow it with the length of Colorado, south to north. And then you get to cover probably 3/4 of Wyoming across the Great Basin. And that's really spectacular. The Great Basin, none of the water that falls there ever leaves. And it's this huge, wide open, beautiful place. And then you enter southeastern Idaho and you stop for a rest day and you ride into Wyoming, back into Wyoming to view Yellowstone. And then you ride the full length of Idaho into Montana. I'm sorry, you ride the full length of Montana back into Idaho, and it's just beautiful. I guess riding south to north would be my first choice. That'd be my recommendation, but doesn't mean you couldn't do it the other way.
So comparably, would you just call this a longer BDR? I mean, are we kind of along the same? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you're not making it easy on me, Keith. I really want to go, but
I'm on the other side of the spectrum. I don't have enough time, and I've got enough money to go, but I just don't get enough vacation time. And I've got the bikes, and I've got the desire. What I don't have is the youth and the time. And so the way I look at it, I'm going to ride for another 10 years if I'm lucky until I'm 77. And I'm going to front load the next 10 years. I'm going to try and do the more challenging ones in the next 5. And that's part of the reason I'm focused on the BDRs and the Continental Divide and the Bajas. Although, to be honest with you, they're not physically that demanding.
No.
It's just that they're more remote. And so the perceived risk is greater. I actually don't think it is, but I think a lot of safety can be built into those. I've actually come to the conclusion that riding off-road is much safer than riding on-road.
Yeah, I could tell you some stories here locally in Idaho. One of the things, and this isn't a knock on anybody that has a UTV, but I rode out of Idaho. I was headed towards Warren. I can't remember the name of the town before Warren, but Avery, maybe, the Avery Tunnels. And I met head-on 30 UTVs in a 30-mile stretch, or 25 UTVs, and they weren't always on their side of the road. And that's kind of a sketchy thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of thoughtless people who think they're on a road that doesn't have painted lines, and so they don't need to worry about oncoming traffic. And that can be really scary.
But I do agree, getting off the beaten path and the trail always feel much safer. But I'm just cognizant of the fact, and I kind of accept the fact that most aren't going to be on their side of the road, so I'm always hugging that right side.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that you quickly discover in Baja is the roads are really remote and there's no traffic. And it's very easy to think that you own all of the road. And once in a while you come across, a pickup truck going the other way, but because the roads are so poor, the trucks are rarely going any speed, and you see them in the distance. Frequently you see a dust cloud. So it's remarkably safe in Baja in terms of oncoming traffic. The greatest risk there is actually coming across animals in the road, sheep and cows.
Sure.
And occasionally you'll come across dogs, but they aren't a problem with all your riding gear on.
No, that was one of my I don't know if I want to call it a concern, but I was kind of hopeful that I would see a moose in Idaho. I definitely didn't want to run into one on the road. But we never had the encounter. I haven't seen one since I was in the Tetons, but we'll see another one maybe this year.
Well, hopefully you see them from a distance and not up too close.
Not too close, and hopefully they're not too angry. They have a reputation for having a bad attitude. Well, Keith, I've had you on the line for quite a while. You have anything else to add, or am I going to cut you loose?
No, I thoroughly enjoy talking to you. It's always fun to talk to you, John. If there's anything I can do to help you schedule either your Continental Divide ride or your Baja ride, or any of the other rides, let me know. I'm more than happy to help in any way I can. I'm trying to put together Colorado BDR first week of September, followed by a Utah BDR the second week of September. And I'm sketching out dates and destinations and lodging. And if I can put that together, I'll invite a handful of friends along and do it. I'll certainly extend an invitation to you. I know your schedule is pretty busy and you've got a lot of things. And I would say if it doesn't work this year, well, perhaps next year. But if you could pencil in Baja for next December, pencil it in your calendar. You need 10 days, and I'll invite you along. I'm already really stoked about going. How's that for closing comment? That's
good. Now, if I show up on my 500, are you going to give me any grief, or am I okay to bring my 500 down there?
Oh, I'm going to bring my 500. I'm just going to bring I'm going to bring my friend Mr. Black with his parts bin.
There you go. And hey, keep me in the loop on the Utah and the Colorado timing, because I have flirted with the idea of leaving the rally and riding the Utah BDR. But maybe I could just keep me in the loop on that. I might be able to tie a couple things together when I'm
I'll take a look and see when the KTM rally is. You said it was in September in Breckenridge?
It's September 13th through the 15th.
Okay. Well, I'll take a look. My friend went to it in Utah this year, and he said it was just an awesome rally. So sorry I missed it, but I should probably try and go this year.
Yeah, my dad went last year, and he had a great time. So this will be our first time going, and we'll go check it out. So
sounds great. Well, really good talking to you. Let me know if I can do anything.
All right, Keith. Thanks again.
Talk to you again. Bye.
Bye. And let me echo that statement, Keith. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Always great to talk to you. Anytime you want to come back to the podcast and share with us your knowledge, your experiences, these great rides that you go on, we'd be more than happy to have you. BenMotorcycleAdventures.com, that's our website. I often talk about our blog and how you can catch up with the latest episodes of the podcast on there, our long-form written content. If you're interested in an off-road, dual sport, or ADV ride, hit me up. That's what we do. So again, BenMotorcycleAdventures.com. Don't forget about us on Facebook and Instagram at Ben Motorcycle Adventures. And like I said earlier, KTM 790 Adventure R closed Facebook group. If you want to be a part of that, watch me build my bike once I take delivery of it. We'll be producing a lot of content and just stay up to date on the latest model. Don't forget to join that Facebook group. And I think that will about do it. Episode 24, we'll close that out. Episode number 25, I can't believe we've got these many in the rear view. And I just want to take a second to shout out to not anyone specifically, but every day I get a number of direct messages on Instagram. That's where we seem to have our our largest following, but people thanking me for producing the podcast and saying they found me or discovered me through the podcast. I really appreciate that. Never thought we'd be coming up on 25 episodes, but it's just something that I'm passionate about. I love to do, and really credit to all of the great guests we've had. I'm just a puppet here. I'm just talking into the mic. So it's these people that share their stories that really make the podcast go. So shout out to all of our guests. And again, thank you for all the positive feedback. That being said, episode 25, I'm not sure if we're going to drop another on Thursday or if you're going to have to wait till next Monday. But again, don't forget about us on Instagram at Ben Motorcycle Adventures. That's usually where you will find the most relevant or updated information. So until then, we'll see you. Thanks for listening.